Great, hello and welcome to our session for the 2021 NCTE. Our session is called ABAR, Guided Reading Workshop, Anti-Bias, Anti-Racist Guided Reading Workshop, a Harm and Healing Reading Protocol. Thanks for joining us. So go ahead, Elisa.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elisa Ramirez. Sorry, I didn't know what to say. Hi, everybody. I'm Elisa Ramirez. I'm a teacher in Chicago Public Schools, NBCT, and a Golden Apple Fellow. I'm happy to be here today with Sarah.
And my name is Sarah Donovan, and I also was a junior high teacher for 20 years in a suburb of Chicago, so not too far from where Elisa is now, though we did not meet in Chicago. We met at a book group. And I am currently a assistant professor of secondary English education at Oklahoma State, where I work with aspiring teachers. I'm happy to be here with Elisa to talk about our guided reading protocol. So just a quick overview of our session today. We're going to do a quick write-in. We're not going to write with you for 10 minutes. We're going to ask you to pause the video and do some writing and thinking before we begin. Then we're going to move into some ABAR research, followed by a little overview of our guided reading protocol. Then Elisa is going to do an example, a model as a kind of a mentor text for you and thinking about how you can practice this. We'll share some classroom examples of how we used this protocol in our different classrooms with different age groups. And then we'll close with a little practice or suggestions for how you can practice, and then a discussion with some book recommendations too. So here's the part where we'd like you to do some writing. And so we like to begin with a write-in. So you can do your write-in on your phone with your thumbs, or grab a notebook and pen and do a little bit of writing. But we think it's really important to kind of get in the right head space, heart space to do the work. And so here's a few suggestions for your writing today. So first, one option is to think about a place or activity that brings you joy. And when you are in that place or doing that activity, what are some of the reasons or opportunities that you would go there? Who is with you in those spaces that bring you joy? And what makes those spaces joyful? Another option is to think about a tradition in your family or a trait that you inherited that you're proud of. Thinking about who is involved with that tradition or trait, and how does it happen or reveal itself, and what about it makes you proud? And another option might be to think about where or to whom you go to for comfort when you feel hurt or harm. And why do you go to those people and places? What about the place or the people brings you comfort? And when was the last time you needed this comfort? So you'll see in these different writing prompts for you today, and maybe this is something that you'll share with your own students, that we're thinking about joy and healing and the people and places and traditions that we are proud of and that brings us comfort and joy and healing. So you can feel free to pause and do a little bit of writing.
So welcome back. Hopefully your writing went well. We're gonna now talk a little bit about the research that Sarah and I have been influenced by in developing this reading protocol. I'm gonna start with a quote from Liz Kleinrock, author of Start Here, Start Now. When I think about anti-bias and anti-racist work, I think a lot about the discomfort that comes from having to interrogate. What are our biases, or what racist or problematic beliefs do I hold about particular people or communities? And once I've done that uncomfortable work, I then have
everybody to our session, LGBTQ+ book groups, books and songs on love and activism.
I just paused it, sorry.
Synopsis of the session that was in the program is how can we
Weird, okay. I had the video was like
Looping.
looping in the back, so, okay. But that's okay. All right, we can continue. I can cut this part out, so sorry.
Okay, no problem.
we So do you want to start that part over, the reading that slide? Yeah.
Yes. Welcome back from your writing, everyone. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the research that's influenced Sarah and I as we've developed our reading protocol that we're sharing with you today. So I want to start out by reading something from Liz Kleinrock, author of Start Here, Start Now. When I think about anti-bias and anti-racist work, I think a lot about the discomfort that comes from having to interrogate what are our biases or what racist or problematic beliefs do I hold about particular people or communities. And once I've done that uncomfortable work, I then have to take on the responsibility of dismantling those biases and those beliefs. Our actions are so often based on our thoughts and opinions of people. We have a responsibility to ourselves, but also, of course, to others to make sure that we also don't harm. And so this strongly resonates with me. And as educators, we have to engage in the work to embrace these anti-bias, anti-racist principles, to disrupt texts, as Tricia Abarbia, Julia Torres, Dr. Kimberly Parker, and Lorena Herman have worked to help us figure out how to do. We have to also decolonize our English language arts curriculum. And in doing that hard work, many are choosing to incorporate excellent texts by BIPOC and LGBTQ plus authors, with more of those texts presenting diverse experiences that include but aren't limited to incidents of bias and racism. We're concerned that their use without careful thought and planning from teachers may cause harm to the very students that those texts are meant to provide mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, as Rudy and Sims Bishop would say. So in anti-bias, anti-racist education, what we're talking about is not new. This is a lens that needs to be applied to school policies, to curriculum, to pedagogy, to interpersonal relationship. Many people have been developing this work, and we are, of course, influenced and inspired by all of these people who are working to push us to do better in our schools, recognizing the limitations of some multicultural education programs to solve inequities. Paulo Freire advocated for critical pedagogy, a social justice approach of teachers and students engaging together with critical information, awareness, and understanding of social inequities to take corrective action. And reading with ABAR awareness means taking notice of incidents of harm and unfairness. We have to recognize an event has occurred that affects the maintenance or the elimination of oppression, as Dr. Love would say. ABAR awareness also means noticing healing in the lives of the characters in books that we're reading, so that we can see and celebrate individual and group identities, and in doing so, interrupt bias. So we hope that then readers can notice family and friends who comfort, hobbies and interests that bring joy and beauty into the lives of these characters. And also the places and experiences that restore confidence and liberate hearts and minds and souls. When readers notice harm and healing in the stories that they read, they begin to identify and interrogate systems that harm and heal in their everyday lives too, we hope.
And so we thought we would share just a little bit about the framework of anti-bias, anti-racist education, which has, again, building on some of the ideas that Elisa shared and the research. But this ABAR education goals comes from the National Association for Education of Young Children from the 2009 book by Derman Sparks, Olson, and Edwards. And there are these 6 principles that are part of, again, not just this, it's not really just a teaching strategy, it's not just a guided reading protocol, but it's part of curriculum, practices, all the ways that the hidden curriculum, the implicit curriculum, the design of the school, the way that we, behavior programs that we might have in school, all of the different practices. So it's a very overarching concept. And today we're just talking about what it looks like in reading. But these are the 6 kind of pillars of ABAR education goals, according to these authors, is to nurture knowledgeable, confident, individual, personal, and social identities. So identities, and thinking about intersection of identities, to promote empathetic interaction with people of diverse backgrounds, to express comfort and joy with human diversity from caring connections, a capacity to critically identify bias and nurture empathy for the hurt bias causes. And this is where we have the harm to healing reading protocol, to be able to identify that bias and the hurt or the harm caused by it. To have the language to describe unfairness and understand it causes hurt. So that's another part of it. And confidence to stand up for self and others in the face of bias, skills to act against discriminatory actions. And we think about literature as offering vicarious experiences to practice that in our reading so that it will be more transferred to our everyday actions. And so we encourage you to follow some of the contemporary anti-bias, anti-racist thought leaders that we follow on Instagram and Twitter. So Kali Wickham-Hurst, Liz Kleinrack, Shay Martin, and Cass Miner are just a few of the many people that are doing this work that we are in conversation with and are inspired by to continue.
Of course, there are multiple resources available out there to continue to think about this work. For example, I have a couple of articles that we're posting here, and also I referred to Dr. Love earlier. Bettina Love wrote, "We want to do more than survive, abolitionist teaching and the pursuit of educational freedom." And so I would also highly recommend reading that text to help continue to develop your understanding of what ABAR education is and what you can do in your classroom. So Sarah and I had a conversation about what we can do together because of the book club that she mentioned before that I was participating in. And because of our conversation, we developed this reading protocol. Like I mentioned before, there's just all these opportunities to read excellent texts in the classroom with students, and sometimes those excellent texts portray an incident of bias or prejudice, and we can use that opportunity with our students to identify what that bias, what that racist act is, what it means, to name it, to name that homophobia, that classism, that ableism, or whatever bias is being demonstrated in a moment in the text. And then to also read on to see how healing hopefully occurs in the text after those incidents have occurred. And so we developed this list of questions to help think through and identify that harm and that healing that happens in those passages. And if You can find those moments that help heal, right? That can be also very healing for a reader to start thinking about the ways that these kinds of incidents may be a part of their lives outside of the classroom as well. So I am going to demonstrate with a reading of a passage from They Call Me Widow by David Bowles. Okay.
And so we offer you some additional passages from Bowles's book, They Call Me Widow, and I think it's helpful to continue to take the example that Elisa offered, and that we also have an article about from Voices from the Middle, and then continue to look at other passages and practice this again. So we have some page numbers for you where we have noticed there being some harm or unfairness happening in the book, and then to continue reading to notice the different ways that there's some healing or comfort happening in the text as well. And so there's several different passages here that you can continue to practice for yourself, and we recommend again that you practice articulating these this discussion and this model for yourself, and then giving students opportunities to practice it as well in sort of a gradual release model. But then this also can be applied to other texts.
So now we're going to talk through some examples of how we use this in the classroom. Last year, I worked with middle school students, specifically with 6th graders, and we read Esperanza Rising. And we did do this harm and healing protocol with this book in my classroom. And so I wanted to share an example of how a student identified this moment in the book as an example of harm. They wrote, "The harm is classism. Classism is when a person feels superior to others just because of their class, like a rich person discriminating for a poor person. More evidence is when Esperanza was discriminating the poor people around them by saying they were dirty and not trustworthy." And the student was able to identify that the person who was causing the harm was the protagonist, Esperanza, displaying this classism. Another student was able to identify that one of the people around them was Esperanza's mom, and Esperanza's mom then was able to be a part of this moment and offer a little bit of, let me find their words exactly. Mama is a person who, no matter what, is nice and makes everything fair, even if she does not know the people. She gives to those who are most in need, and even though she's also now in need, she would rather give to others. As a result of this, she left with a little girl, super happy, smiling with her new little doll. But Esperanza has to see that she could do the same as Mama. And so the students, read through and they identified this moment and started to think about, well, how can this moment where Esperanza displays this classism towards this little girl, how can it be turned into healing while the mom steps in and does provide some healing, but Esperanza still has some growth to do herself and to grow into being somebody that could step in and do more instead of the actions that she did take in the book. So that was an example from my classroom this year as we were reading through Esperanza Rising.
Thanks, Elisa. Yeah, at Oklahoma State University, I teach secondary education English students, so people who want to become high school English teacher, middle or high school English teachers. So we have a young adult literature course, and students read a variety of texts. And one of the assignments in the course is to do an ABAR guided reading protocol as you might model in your classroom. And so the students, the college students, practice like talking to students and framing a passage from the text that has harm, and how to approach it and kind of lead into the conversation with students, that especially is a moment of discomfort and can be triggering for some students in the classroom. But how to kind of frame a text in order to introduce it, but then also just kind of sit in that unfairness and discomfort, to read into other sections and look for the places that the character feels a sense of comfort or healing. And one of the things that we really noticed, especially in these two books, Out of Darkness and King and the Dragonflies, is that there's a lot of really systemic, well, of course, there's systemic racism and systemic or structural racism in our country. And in not every situation are the characters in a position to disrupt an unfair situation. So for example, in Out of Darkness takes place in 1937 Texas. Wash is a Black adolescent and Naomi is of Mexican descent. And these are two people who are falling in love, and it's a really beautiful love story. But when Naomi goes grocery shopping and is faced with a racist occurrence in the grocery shop where she's not able to shop there, Wash is also not in a position to safely interrupt the harm that's happening in that store, and is not in a position to safely name that harm in real life in the situation of the book. And so he later works with Naomi to sort of comfort her, and look for other places where she can do her grocery shopping in a safer environment, a safer place, and offers her comfort in conversation and in recognition. And that is his way of helping Naomi work through that harm. And then their love also is a place of joy and healing for them, even though when they're living in a society that offers all of this structural oppression for them. So even, and then let me just turn over to King and the Dragonfly, because this is also kind of an interesting way of thinking about this that my students didn't quite see. And these are, college students as well, and they're reading these and really get caught up in these incidents of harm and racism, and they're really outrageous and outraged and uncomfortable by it. And they kind of sit in that discomfort, which I think is important, but are not always reading on to look for healing in those situations. And so in King and the Dragonflies, the main character is questioning his sexuality, but is also experiencing grief at the loss of his brother. And he's in a situation where another racist character intimidates him, and he is again not in a safe place to speak up because he may be harmed further. And then the character who causes the harm then apologizes. And the apology is really not sufficient, and it's also not enough to make him feel safe. And it's not recognizing sort of, again, the systemic issues that are happening in the school for homophobia. And so this is another example where the character is not in a position to speak up. It's not in a position to speak up, nor should have to in that situation. But we have to read on a couple pages to see where then the character feels joy, feels harm, feels a sense of safety, and where that is. And this character found it in poetry. This character found it in a text of reading some poetry that helped him find himself and to feel safe and to do some healing after the harm that was caused to him. So we really are looking for the complexity. And I think certainly in these two books, it's quite complex and it's not so easy. We can see it, we can name it, but looking for the places of harm and also noticing how systemic it is another issue too. So these are conversations that we're having and continue to have in our classes, but there's still a lot more to do. And so we put together a book list for you all. That the books on the top are primarily, well, first, most of them are verse novels, and they're primarily sort of middle grade, early adolescence. And the texts on the bottom are primarily for young adult classes or high school setting. But again, our books should cross the lifeline of our students. And there's also picture books that you might consider as well when practicing the harm and healing reading protocol. But these are some books that we love.
So when reading through these incidents of prejudice, of bias, of racism in novels in the classroom, we have to reflect on those passages as teachers and be deliberate about how we present them and discuss those moments with our students. And that can be part of our work, thinking about anti-bias and anti-racist education. But I also want to make sure to say that we must be, wait, I don't know if I made sense. I'm going to say that again.
Yeah.
So as a Latina educator working in a school with predominantly Latinx students, I try my best to think about the text that I'm presenting my students and to give them opportunities to use this ABAR reading protocol. I think as educators, we must reflect and be deliberate about how we present and discuss these moments of prejudice in the classroom with our students. And it's important that we listen to what the students have to say, especially if we work in a community that has experiences such as the ones being portrayed in the book. And so it's incredibly important to be careful, be thoughtful about how we use these amazing books in our classroom so that we make sure that we don't perpetuate that same harm that we're trying to interrupt and prevent.
I'm just going to share our contact information one more time. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us to think a little bit more about our reading practices and anti-bias, anti-racist education more broadly. Elisa and I started this conversation almost 2 summers ago and are still thinking about it, and are happy to have this opportunity to think about it together, the two of us, and also with you. But we encourage you to continue the conversation and to reach out to us if you have any questions. We'd love to hear if you try this in your own reading practices, or maybe with your PLC community, maybe integrating into your courses. We'd just love to hear how it goes, and are open to continuing the conversation with you. So be well, friends.
Thank you.